So this is the first Hackers and Maintainers podcast. So might change the name of that, but I'm interviewing Chris McCormick. I first talked to Chris on Twitter. I'd come across hostgitea.com, I believe, in a Google search. And I saw he was hacking on Lisp and started following him on Twitter. I think Chris is a great example of someone who is intrinsically motivated to program. My favorite types of programmers are intrinsically motivated to program. I view Chris almost as an artist who kind of programs as a medium, or uses programs as a medium. He draws his own game tile sets. He composes his own music procedurally. Does a lot of very interesting projects. Chris is a freelancer and an indie hacker. Thanks for being here, Chris.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me on your first podcast.
Yes, it's a pleasure. So I wanted to start by asking you how you started programming.
So I started when I was about 8 or 9 years old. My mother brought home an Apple IIe, and I just got really into it and thought it was really cool, and was playing video games, obviously. I think a lot of programmers get their start that way, playing video games and then wanting to make them. And nothing's really changed for the 30 or so years since then. I still find video games motivating, and yeah, just like building stuff.
Do you remember the first thing you programmed?
Yes, it was a little game of like chasey. I don't know what you would call it in the US, but you know, this classic schoolyard game where you like one person chases another and tag. It's tag. And yeah, so there was like a little X on the screen and a little O on the screen, and I think you were the X and you had to like not be caught by the O. And what was really big about that for me was keyboard input. So I remember struggling with the keyboard input, and then me and my mum worked out, you know, by looking at manuals and stuff, this is how you get the basic interpreter to take keyboard input from the user.
So your mom taught you how to program, or was she a programmer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, no, she wasn't. She was a school teacher, but I think she was learning as much as I was, but you know, we learned it together.
That's great. Do you remember how you viewed programming? I guess you were doing it mostly as fun, but do you remember kind of how you thought about it, and how would you compare, if you remember it all, like how would you compare that to maybe how you think about programming now, I guess, as a doing it professionally?
Yeah, I don't actually have that good a memory. I don't remember what I was thinking at 8 years old. I just remember there were things I wanted to do, and programming was the way to do it. You know, yeah, it was obvious that you couldn't make these video games without learning to code. So I guess it just happened as a side effect of that.
Did you expect yourself to continue doing it? Did you continue doing it from that point forward? What was that like?
I mean, yeah, I remember thinking at some point, like when I started thinking about careers and things like that and what I was going to do, I sort of always knew that I was going to be a software developer from, you know, that point on. It was sort of like clear to me that computers was something that motivated me. So yeah, I guess the answer to that is yes.
Wow, that's very cool. Okay, so I want to get into your current work in a bit, but I first want to discuss something you said in an email exchange we had. You mentioned that your goal when programming these days is to create small, self-contained software artifacts that require little maintenance. So can you explain what you mean by that and how you go about achieving it today?
Yeah, so in the intro, you said you thought of my work as being like that of an artist, and that really resonates with me, although I would never call myself like a software artist or something like that, because people would turn off the podcast immediately. But no, I am really inspired by the arts in general. I love the way in the arts a lot of it is about producing artifacts. So, you know, when you make a composition, you create this self-contained thing that works by itself. And the same, you know, with a painting or any other type of art, a piece of poetry, sometimes there's back and forth and you go back and edit things later or change them or build upon them or do a second one. But I really like the whole philosophy of just like building a thing that works by itself and is a self-contained artifact. And I think the reason I like that is basically laziness, because I don't want to have to build something that has a huge maintenance burden for me in the future. So I'm trying to reduce the amount of work I have to do in the future by making a thing that works now and is good enough to do what it's supposed to do, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So you want to build work that lasts without your continued input.
Yeah. And another place where you see a lot of that is the video games industry. So at least traditionally, it's not so much the case anymore, but in the old days, it used to be like once you'd shipped the game, you could not really go back and change it. You know, you would send out the CD-ROM or the diskette and it would be like, that's it. There's no bug fixing, nothing. So I draw a lot of inspiration from the world of video games as well in that respect.
Music is that way too. I think most of the writing, even, it seems like all of those things are done when they're done. Software kind of suffers from this maintenance problem.
And it's actually, I mean, you see people on GitHub like not using a library because there hasn't been an update for a year. It's like, well, sometimes the library is actually complete and it does what it's supposed to do and it doesn't have any bugs and it's fine to use even though it's old. But people are kind of addicted to this novelty thing where it's like, if it's not being poked and prodded, then it doesn't work anymore or it's no good.
Yeah, and I think that comes in part from in some cases, software, the environment evolves and the software has to be like maintained to keep up with it, but that's definitely not always the case.
It often is the case though, you're right.
Yeah. Do you have any approaches to making software last longer without maintaining it? I think if you have any insights here, a lot of people would like to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's about, so I've basically got in the habit of keeping the number of lines of code in any one thing that I build. Like I try and keep them under sort of 2,000 lines or around 2,000 lines of code, which I know sounds insane, but the way to do that is build things that are modular. So once you have something that can be carved out into a separate library or something like that, then you do that. And actually lately so like at the moment I'm working on a backend web framework for Node.js, and I didn't do what I normally do, which is like start with a separate library project and build that and then try and build projects using it. All I'm doing is like copying the code from the previous version, and this will horrify people, but I'm copying the code from the previous version, from the previous thing I'm building into the next thing I'm building. And what happens is the piece of backend code gets massaged and eventually becomes something that has the corners knocked off it and will be an artifact that I can push up as a complete self-contained library because it's had that evolution through these projects. So yeah, that's an example of something that I think won't be very many lines of code, but I hope it will have quite a lot of leverage. Yeah.
What are you hoping to build with the new web framework? Or how might it? What does it do? What's the purpose of you building it?
So basically, if you're working in Python or Ruby, you've got Django, you've got Flask in Python. Ruby has Ruby on Rails, and they're these frameworks that are a bit opinionated, and they kind of go, this is the way to do this thing. You know, if you want to send emails, you can do it. If you want to render templates, you can do it. All the kind of web stuff, you know. And PHP, when that was it still is a thing, but when most websites were built with PHP, it had a similar philosophy of like, there was a way to do everything. So you could send an email in your PHP script quite easily. Node.js seems to lack a library or a framework that does this. I know there's a few, but when I looked at them, they're very much like you have to buy into the whole framework. And I don't know, they didn't seem to, there's an essence, there's a few things that you really need a backend web framework to do like authentication, including like user data. So I want to store a bunch of data against this user. There's rendering, HTML. There's yeah, I have a list somewhere which I should look up, but I basically made a list of these things that, and if you go to the Django documentation, it's got like this list of, it's got the basic things that you want a backend framework to do. And I just think it would be good if there was a Node.js framework that has that set of things built in and is quite opinionated. So it won't be for everyone, but it's especially going to be for indie hacker type people where you want a small amount of code to get, say a SaaS product up and running quite quickly. So that's what I'm kind of targeting. So in the projects I'm building, yeah, it's that kind of thing where you have those basic needs of, I need to have some users log in, I need to store some data, that kind of thing. Send some emails.
Yeah. Do you have a name for that project yet? Or is it publicly released?
No, it's not publicly released. It's probably, there's bits of it in public code that is out there. I'm just trying to think, but yeah, no, it doesn't have. I've been through a few different names, but naming things, as you know, is hard.
Yeah.
The naming things and caching. What's that joke? There's two
Cache
hard
and
things in computer science. Yeah, naming things, cache and validation, and off by one errors.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, you have to send me the link and I'll add it to the show notes, or the YouTube like the little info area. In the email you sent to me, you mentioned also that you were inspired in particular by a few projects. Make the build dependency tool, and salt, spelled like the molecule sodium chloride, but said like salt, the cryptographic library. Can you tell me what you find inspiring about those projects?
Yeah, so I guess what I love about, I love the idea of, I don't know, I guess a lot of programmers have this same frustration, like the more dependencies you get involved in your project, the more likely it is for your project to explode when you deploy it. And there's lots of great tools now for working around those problems, but in general, pulling in dependencies is a thing that should be done, not be done lightly. So you should do it with great consideration of which dependencies you're using. And make is an example of something that's pretty much always around. Like it's easy to have on a system. It's often not pre-installed on a system. And the other good thing about make is that it doesn't change much anymore. It just does what it does. So that's an example of what I was talking about before, where it really doesn't need too much maintenance. It does what it does, and it works very well, unless you have spaces in your file names. But apart from that, it works great. And then NaCl, the cryptographic library, I mean, it's just a gem. It's like, so that's the cryptographic library by Dan Bernstein. And, when you look at the code, they made a version that you could tweet in, I don't remember how many tweets, but it's like just this beautiful, tiny piece of code that does exactly what you need for public key cryptography using elliptic curves and not much else. It's like very focused, and it doesn't really need much else. Yeah, it's just so for me that's an ideal to reach for. I will never ship something as good as NaCl. I know that. I don't have the cryptographic knowledge of someone like Dan Bernstein or the code. He's got amazing coding skills as well in writing secure software. But it's a thing to aspire to for me. So, and like when I'm building a piece of front-end code or something that's got a UI, I still keep that in the back of my mind. It's like, that's sort of like perfection for me is how can I make this UI small and self-contained in the same way that NaCl is.
Yeah, I think on your blog you called make and salt, you called them software axes, in that they have one purpose, they do one thing and they do it exceptionally well, and there's nothing else to replace them that does it as good as the axe.
Yep. Yeah, so the axe is like an example of something that's been around for probably a couple of millennia and just does what it's supposed to do. I mean, axes have changed, But the other property of an axe is each time you get a new axe, you're not getting your old axe upgraded. You're getting a new artifact that implements the axe protocol or whatever, and it just has some tweak to make it a bit better. And I think, programmers are addicted to updates, like pushing out stuff and like often breaking people's software when they do it. Like not necessarily even introducing bugs, but like changing the UI in a way that the person doesn't like it. We've all had that experience where you're using some piece of tech, or the worst is like Google deprecating an entire product. It's like, come on. Yeah. It's just the most hostile user experience you can imagine. Just going, oh, that thing they're using, yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, so I like the idea of an axe where you deliver the thing and someone can take the axe or not take it, but if they do, they've got it and they don't have to worry about it like being upgraded or changed in some way they don't like.
You also mentioned you were inspired by a tweet by Peter Levels, the famous, I'd call him famous indie hacker, like who's probably one of the biggest indie hackers. In that tweet, he describes using a monolithic VPS to basically multi-host all of his projects on that one virtual private server. What is it about that approach to hosting? Is it I would assume it's the simplicity, but do you have any other reason?
It is that, but it's also, I mean, like, I'm quite a cheap person, like, and it's really about efficiency. So it's about like not having to expend resources. It's about being able to, Daniel Vassallo has this thing that he's been tweeting about recently about taking lots of small bets. So rather than relying on your idea being good, assume that you might have some good ideas and the rest will not really take off. And then you have to do lots of like small bets to uncover which of your ideas are going to be popular, because you can't know ahead of time. So it takes away the requirement that you predict something that's inherently very difficult to predict. And so if you're taking small bets, you need to be able to do it in a way that's efficient. And I think Peter Level's approach, and it's my approach too, I have like one DigitalOcean box with like 30 web applications running on it. And it allows you to do that in a way that's scalable. So you're not having to like spin up a Heroku instance for every single one, spending $7 a month. Like if I had all 30 on a Heroku instance, it'd be a lot of money per month. I think it's good to not prematurely optimize. So prematurely optimizing would be like assuming that your project is going to go big and building it for scale, having too much of a focus on building it for scale. And I think a lot of people make this mistake. They focus on like Kubernetes clusters and things like that, which if your thing is going to go big, you're probably going to acquire the resources to be able to do it a different way in the future anyway, like be able to rescale it. And that's often happened with startups. They've had to figure out how to scale something, and that's part of the process. But for me at the moment, I'm optimizing for putting out lots of small things and doing that sustainably, so that giving them a chance, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely do. You also mentioned in your blog, it's kind of a similar idea, but this convex tinkering. Do you want to explain more about that? I know it's an idea you've kind of borrowed from Nassim Taleb and have adapted for your own purposes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's 100% Nassim Taleb's idea, and it's actually the same as what I was talking about before with Daniel Vassallo. So it's this idea of taking bets that have a potentially large upside, but the downside is limited. And that's where the idea of convexity comes. So if you look at the graph of this, it goes like, like that. And that's a convex shape. And the idea is when you're on the upside is infinite, but on the downside of the graph, it flattens out. So there's a limit to your losses, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And so Nassim Taleb talks about this in terms of options trading and things like that, where you take lots of small bets. But for me, indie hacking is the same kind of thing, like putting out these projects and seeing, like, having the ability to capture upside if it comes, but not relying, if the project doesn't work out, there's no great loss. And so an example would be if you invested a lot of time in building one thing and then it fails, you've like lost this huge chunk of time. Whereas if you do something and put it out and test the market quite quickly, you've lost you've made a much smaller loss of an investment of time, and then you could do it again with more things. Yeah,
yeah, I think
it's probably,
yeah, I think that,
probably not the best explanation I could give.
no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me, but I'm also following all the same people you are on Twitter, and so I get
Yeah.
those ideas thrown at me too. But I think it makes plenty of sense. And if anyone has any questions, they can go read Nassim Taleb's book. I wanted to mention before we begin discussing some of your public work. I know you freelance now. I think you've been freelancing for 10 years, maybe longer. I wondered if you could talk about your experience in freelancing, and maybe how and why you freelance, and maybe what kind of projects you focus on in your freelance work.
Sure. Yes, I mean, the freelancing is really for the same reason as the indie hacking. It's the trying to get freedom in your life and control over what you work on, and get paid to do it so that it's sustainable. And, you know, I started freelancing. I was working as a software developer, and I had a great job, but it was like, I think it was literally just being required to go into the office every day for certain hours and, you know, grind out code. And I mean, I'm coming from a position of like immense privilege, like, so I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but for whatever reason, you know, I think I watched Office Space, that Mike Judd movie, and I quit my job like a week later. I was like, it just clarified it for me, like, oh yeah, no, I don't actually want to do this. So then I kind of like did a course where I knew I could do the course very easily, a 6-month networking course. And one of my old employer started sending me work as a contractor, and I would just invoice them, and then that you know, someone else got wind of this and like sent me some other work, and then it just built from there. So yeah, that was my path into freelancing, was pretty much just like quitting my job and then getting work from my previous employer, and then slowly building a network, but without really trying. It was kind of like all referrals. Yeah, which was very lucky because I had no idea what I was doing at the time.
Yeah, I think that's why I originally talked to you, was to ask about this freelancing aspect, because I find it very desirable for the reasons you listed. You can fund your indie hacks, and you are somewhat in control of your time. I think a lot of people would like to do more freelancing if they can.
Yeah, there's also another side to that, which is I actually, you know, so I've got to a position where I probably don't have to do that much freelancing anymore, but I still like doing it because I find the challenge of having a client's problems. It's very easy as a programmer with no external incentives or like pressures to just build stuff that nobody wants, which I do a lot of anyway. But yeah, so what I like about working with clients is it's like real problems, and often like some sharp business pointy stick that they need to solve. And I think it's very healthy to stay in that game of like solving real problems. So yeah, I think I do still freelance, even though I probably don't really need to that much anymore. Yeah.
I think I've heard a lot of people discuss getting inspiration from work they've been assigned in a freelance context, or even their jobs. Like a lot of people, their startups are a result of having been at a job where they saw this problem repeatedly, or saw how big or unsolved it was. And so I think that lines up really well with that. I did want to discuss your public work, although I'm really happy we have discussed like the things that underlie some of your decision making. I guess so recently you've been, like within the last year or so, you released a roguelike, Asterogue, a roguelike game. You've been working on a lot of open source work as well, music apps. I know you have a history of doing algorave music. Yeah, I just wanted to, if you want to talk about any of those projects, or you know, anything you've been working on recently that you want to share.
Yeah, I wish I was better prepared for that question.
You do just have you have so much work. It's a lot.
Yeah, that's my challenge, is that I know that I'm the kind of person who starts a lot of things. You know, the shiny object syndrome is what people call it, where you like, I have this great idea, I'm going to run off and chase that now and drop my old stuff. So my personal challenge is to like always take myself back to really finish things off and make sure they're done, and also not be so excited about my own ideas, because just looking at history, like quite often things I build, just no one's interested. So yeah, what I'm trying to do at the moment, I think, is like figure out a way to, you know, I'm framing that in a very negative light, like building a lot of things, but it's like trying to figure out how to take that thing that I do, which is building a lot of random things, and turn it into something positive that is useful, is valuable. And I think the way to do that is, so I've been thinking recently about how to show people how to ship their things faster. So stuff like what we were talking before about having like on a deployment system that they can very easily put new things up, and what kind of tech to use to build stuff quickly and get it out there. Because yeah, that's obviously something I've done a fair bit. I mean, I guess I could just talk about what I'm working on at the moment, which is the things that are exciting me. So yeah, the music app side, I've been working on this chiptune. If you go to my YouTube channel, which is MCCORMIX, McCormick's, there's a couple of videos I posted recently on this chiptune composition app that I've been building. So, you know, writing music is quite a difficult thing, and I'm always thinking about ways to make it easier. And what this does is just to try and make the process of writing a chiptune simpler, because there's a lot of people out there doing game jams and stuff like that, and they need music for their game. And it's always the thing where you get to the end of the game jam and you're like, oh my God, I need music, and I don't know how to write music. So yeah, that's called 8bitmusicmaker.com. And people can go there to find out more about that. And on the games front, I've just started a new thing with a couple of friends where we're going to each build a game every 3 months and then release them one game per month kind of thing. Yeah, so that's very nascent, and I'm working on another roguelike for that. Yeah, and then on the open source side, there's like the web backend stuff. So thinking about web backend stuff and decentralization on the web, and things like that.
Very cool. So a lot of your open source work is perhaps in pursuit of maybe building something for someone in your position who is building a lot of projects, because they're really, yeah, that Peter Level's tweet and your own experience, I think that sounds like an interesting problem area potentially. Certainly a use case.
Yep. I think a lot of people do have trouble getting things out, and I don't have that problem. So it's like, well, maybe that's something where I could bring value to people who they want to get their things shipped so they can see, so they can get some validation or whatever, but maybe they're finding it challenging. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think I said I would only do 20 minutes and then we do some rapid fire. So I wanted to get and do those. I'm inspired by Tim Ferriss's rapid fire questions here, but they're programming related.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you could only program,
it's like a technical interview.
Yeah, they're going to be. You can get the wrong answer here, and there will be no penalty. I promise.
I'm sure I will.
And you can have a longer answer if you want to. But if you could only program in one language, what would it be?
Hands down, ClojureScript.
ClojureScript. Why ClojureScript and not Clojure?
Because I like shipping for the Node VM and the browser more than Java artifacts.
Even for backend work, you'll use ClojureScript?
I am, yeah.
Cool. Preferred editor or IDE?
Vim, just because that's how it worked out. I'm not religious about that or anything.
Yeah, it tends to be just like kind of whatever you start programming, and why learn anything else? It tends to work pretty well. Where do you spend most of your time online? Like as far like what is like the website you'll like wake up in the morning and check, or where do you what website are you on before you fall asleep?
I'm actually trying not to do that. Like, yeah, I've been like trying to cut out any kind of social media, and I realized reading articles is kind of like eating sugar in that. Yeah, anyway, but I've been trying to do that less. I mean, I would say I check indie hackers quite often because it's just such a great community. And yeah, I'm trying not to read so much of like hacker news and Twitter and stuff like that.
Yeah, I haven't spent much time on
And read more books.
indie hack. Read more books. So, is there anything
Yeah, so
in particular, anything you've been reading lately that you think is?
Jordan O'Connor, who's an indie hacker, recommended Cal Newport's Deep Work, and that was pretty good. Right now, I'm reading Spelunky, which is a book by Derek Yu. He's a game developer, and it was his like blow up game. So the book is called the same thing as the game, Spelunky, and it's about his development of the game, and it's just a fascinating read and has some great insights.
Your desire to get off of social media fits with pretty much everyone who I know who's read Deep Work. It seems to be like underlying factor across everyone.
Yeah, for me, that was a confirmation bias thing because I was already trying to get off, and then I read Deep Work, and I was like, okay, that backs up what I already think.
Are there any like programming tools, websites, blogs, books that you recommend more than others?
Geez. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. That's probably not a good sign.
No, it's probably my fault. I probably asked too broad of a question. But any tools? Is there anything well, maybe not. I mean, a lot of these things tend to be pretty subjective. But again, no,
I mean, I think it's good to cultivate the philosophy of using the right tool for the right job. So yeah, I try and I like to experiment with new tools, even like, open source editors, Blender, Inkscape, things like that, because I've found that a small investment of time in learning a little bit about how to use those things can often pay off quite a lot in the future in terms of productivity, like just being able to jump in and go, there's no designer around and I need a logo, I'll just quickly bang something out, that kind of thing. So yeah, the right tool for the right job, and I even have written code in PHP like within the last 3 years, even though it's not something I use every day, just to like see what's still good about it and things like that.
I see. So yeah, I like doing this too, where I feel like, because I feel like there are times in the past when I've gotten stuck in a certain framework or programming language, and then I moved on and realized my productivity has been greatly enhanced, and so that definitely lines up with my experience. Last question here. If programming was obsolesced, I don't know, maybe there's like a singularity, or for some reason you couldn't program anymore, what do you think you would do with your time?
Probably drawing. I've been doing a lot of drawing and music, and yeah, that'd be it. I think, if I could choose 100% how I spent all my time, it would be like obviously hanging out with family, going in nature, but also making art, really, drawing and music. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a great place to close it. It's like right back where we started. Thank you, Chris, for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course.